We're in the middle of a series about forgiveness called Moving On. Have you ever felt like you had your own voice stuck in your head? You know what I'm talking about, right? You hear it when you do something you aren't proud of, or something that hurts someone else, or something you wish never happened at all. Suddenly that little voice seems to be taking on all of your mind and talking on repeat in your head, and there's nothing that you can do to tune it out. Maybe you made a joke in class, but no one laughed at it. You were so embarrassed that the voice in your head said, "Oh, I'm so stupid." Or maybe you sent a text to the group chat that really hurt your best friend. Or you spread a rumor around school about someone. You felt so awful about it, and that voice kept telling you, "I'm a bad friend." Maybe you couldn't get out of a cycle of self-harm or anxiety or guilt, and you felt so discouraged that that voice wasn't helping when it said, "I'm not good enough." Or maybe you intentionally broke your family rules because you just had to go to that party or hang out with those certain friends or date that person. Then that voice said, "I'm a terrible person." Well, if you've ever experienced this, you are not alone. We've all done something that's caused us to beat ourselves up. We've all found ourselves trying to tune out that voice in our own head. We've all found ourselves struggling to move on from what we've done in our past. In other words, we've all been in situations where we've needed to forgive ourselves. Now, remember, forgiveness is letting go of negative feelings that we have when we've been hurt, harmed, or disappointed, regardless of whether that person who caused the harm actually deserves or wants our forgiveness. Now, sometimes we need to forgive someone who has hurt us, but today we're talking about something a little different. We're talking about those times when we need to forgive ourselves, or we need to ask someone to forgive us. And if we're listening to that voice on repeat in our minds, forgiving ourselves or asking for forgiveness can feel pretty scary. Maybe you're afraid of asking for forgiveness because it feels like you're admitting that you've done something wrong. And honestly, you don't just want to say that out loud so everybody can hear it. I don't want people to think that I did something wrong. Or maybe you're afraid to ask for forgiveness because there's a chance that you could get in trouble for what you did. You don't want to risk getting punished, and that voice in your head is telling you it's easier to not tell anyone about this. Maybe you're afraid to ask for forgiveness because you're not really sure how it works. You've asked for forgiveness in the past, but nothing really changed or made the situation any better. That voice in your head is saying, "Why would I want to ask for forgiveness if nothing is going to change?" Or maybe for you, you've made a mistake and you can't stop beating yourself up about it. You know you made a not so great choice and you're stuck feeling a lot of guilt and shame. And the voice in your head is saying, "I'm a failure and I don't deserve to be forgiven." See what I mean? This whole forgiveness thing can be hard, especially when it applies to us. Whether we're struggling to forgive ourselves or struggling to ask someone to forgive us, finding the courage to actually take a step to move is really difficult. That voice in our head might even be telling us that moving on just isn't even possible. But the truth is, moving on is possible for all of us. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and we all have the opportunity to choose forgiveness that will help us move forward from those moments. What's awesome is that people have been dealing with this forgiveness stuff for a really long time. They've asked big questions about how to move on, how to forgive themselves and others, and why we even try to forgive in the first place. One of the people asking questions like this thousands of years ago was a really important guy named Paul. Paul was a leader who helped start the early church. During that time, he wrote a bunch of letters to different churches and groups of people, teaching them what it looks like to follow Jesus. One of the letters he wrote was to the Christians in Rome, and in it, Paul shared how God shows us that we're forgiven. And what Paul said is something that I think will help us understand forgiveness as well. Go ahead and take a look. Here's the first thing I want us to take from this verse. We don't need to have it all together. We don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to do anything to earn God's forgiveness. God gives it to us freely. Why? Because he loves us that much. Through Jesus' death on the cross, God showed us kindness, compassion, and love. God didn't feel sorry for us, but cared enough about us to want to do something to save us from our sins, our wrongs, and our mistakes. So God made a way to forgive us through Jesus. Knowing Jesus changes everything, including the way that we experience forgiveness. Because of Jesus, we have been able to give the gift to know what forgiveness feels like. Now, you may be thinking, that sounds great and all, but you don't know what I've done. If you did, you'd understand why forgiving myself is so hard. No matter the reason, forgiving ourselves might feel impossible, especially if we feel like we don't deserve that forgiveness. But remember what Paul said in this passage. While we were still sinners, God didn't wait for us to get all right, or have it all together, or be 100% perfect to forgive us. No, the forgiveness God gives is available to us right now, just as we are, just where we are, and that includes everybody. And it's because God has forgiven all of our sins and mistakes that we have the power to forgive others and ourselves as well. Let's go back to Paul for just a second. He wrote another letter to the Colossian church, and what he shared with them about forgiveness is huge. Let's take a look at that as well. God has forgiven us completely. We didn't earn it, and we don't deserve it. Even though it costs a lot, and because we've been forgiven by God in a really big way, you and I can extend the same thing to others and ourselves, even when the other person doesn't deserve it, even when we feel like we don't deserve it, because what's incredible is God's forgiveness is never about being deserving. We don't have to do anything in order to receive it. It's about God's love and compassion for us, because everybody needs forgiveness. You see, forgiveness starts with us. It's a process that we go through to let go of negative emotions that we feel. And before we can move on, we've got to learn how to forgive ourselves, to let go of the negative emotions we feel about who we are or what we've done. So I think it's important that we start there, with ourselves. How do we learn to forgive ourselves when we mess up? Here are 3 things that we can do to practice this. First, identify where in your life you're having a hard time moving on. What does that voice in your head keep telling you about who you are and what you've done? What do you keep replaying over and over and over again? What mistake or misstep are you trying to hide or cover up? Second, remember that you're forgiven. In the areas where forgiveness feels impossible for you, remember that you are already forgiven. Through Jesus, God has offered you all the forgiveness that you'll ever need. So find a way to remember that this week. Write down the phrase, "I am forgiven," somewhere that you can see it daily. Maybe memorize Romans 5:8 that we talked about today. Or ask your landing leader to text you this week as a reminder that forgiveness God offers you is always available. And third, take one step towards forgiving yourself. Finally, take one step toward moving on and forgiving yourself. This will look different for each of us at different times in our lives. Maybe you're saying a prayer and asking God to help you move on, or maybe it's confessing that you're struggling with to a trusted friend or adult in your life. Maybe for you, it's asking for help at the landing, or maybe it's apologizing and asking for forgiveness from the person that you've wronged. Maybe it's no longer defining yourself by your mistakes and your choices. And for some of you, maybe it's not punishing yourself anymore by self-harming or negative thoughts. Whatever this looks like for you and what you're dealing with right now, take one step toward that forgiveness that's available for all of us. Remember, everybody needs forgiveness. Everybody needs grace and compassion, because we're all gonna mess up and make mistakes. Taking a step towards forgiving yourself will help you take a step towards moving on and moving forward. And it will help you take a step to offer that same forgiveness to others. I know that this whole forgiveness thing isn't easy, whether we're trying to forgive someone else or asking for forgiveness ourselves, or even forgiving ourselves. It can feel like a lot to figure out. The good news is we weren't meant to figure big things out like this on our own. That's the reason we have the landing, so that everyone has a place where they can share what they're learning about and dealing with when it comes to topics like forgiveness. So today, keep this conversation about forgiveness going when you are going throughout your week. That way you can share what you are struggling with about forgiveness at the landing this Thursday. Take care, guys.